Good evening. My name is Michelle Stempian, Education and Community Programs Manager at the Holland Museum. Thank you for joining us virtually this evening for a fun and educational program on a topic that's popular to many of us in many places and not just Michigan, the history of beer. Before we get started, I have some announcements to share, and although we are not physically together this evening, I want to take a moment to honor the space that the Holland Museum and the Capon and Settlers House Museums occupy. The Holland area surrounds Lake Makatawa, ancestrally known to the Potawatomi, Odawa, and Peoria nations as Mekatugami, or Black Lake. Each nation has their own rich cultural traditions and beliefs that still survive today. We, the Holland Museum, acknowledge that this land is sacred, and we commit to honoring the land and the indigenous peoples who have stewarded it for generations through continuing education, partnerships, and self-reflection. Thank you. This program is being recorded. Please remain on mute throughout the presentation. If you have any questions, you may enter them in the chat, and we will share them during the Q&A following the presentation. Links to the program recording and a program survey will be emailed tomorrow to our program participants. We appreciate you sharing your thoughts about this and future programs. Our newest exhibition at the Holland Museum just opened last week. In Service to Others, A History of Holland's Women Missionaries explores the varied roles of local women in the missionary field who sought to improve lives through expansion of education and healthcare to communities across the globe. So we hope you will come and see this exhibition. It will be on view until November 28th. And just a reminder that the museum's current hours are Mondays, Fridays, and Saturdays from 10 until 5. We are always open the second Monday of the month in the evening from 4 to 7 for free. And we have some great programs coming up in the next few weeks. On Thursday, August 11th at 7 p.m. Our 2022 summer interns will be discussing a great display that they have been putting together this summer on the story behind the Holland Museum building, which was the original post office in Holland. So you can come on that night, check out their exhibition and hear them speak about their journey, educational journey this summer, learning about Holland and the Holland Post Office. And this is an in-person program which will take place in the museum's Spark Lab Smithsonian space. And on Thursday, August 25th at 7, join us for the real life stories of former missionaries, Judy Estelle, Sarah Unzicker, Jeanette Beagley, and Kathleen Beal. This is also an in-person program that will take place on August 25th at 7 o'clock. And you can join us each Wednesday this summer at 7 o'clock for walking tours featuring Holland's historic architecture, the story of the 1871 Holland Fire, and historic 8th Street. The August 3rd architecture tour will be completely in Spanish. And you can also visit our Capon and Settlers houses on Fridays and Saturdays from 11 to 3 p.m. until August 20th. And you can learn more about all of these programs and register to attend at hollandmuseum.org. And as we continue to offer these programs at little or no cost so that we can be as accessible as possible to the community, we hope you will support our efforts with a donation to the Holland Museum, and you can see the link on your screen. And we thank you. So on to tonight's program. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Patti Smith, a current special education teacher and former legal aid lawyer. Patti Smith is the author of 3 nonfiction books besides Michigan Beer, Vanishing Ann Arbor, Images of America Downtown Ann Arbor, and a history of the People's Food Co-op in Ann Arbor. I guess you can guess she lives in Ann Arbor. She has written for craftbeer.com, West Suburban Living Magazine, Concentrate, Mittenbrew, the Ann, AADL's Pulp blog, and the Ann Arbor Observer. Patti is a frequent public speaker around town, curating HERsay, an all-woman variety show, Grown Folks Reading, a story time for grownups, May It Please the Court, an all-lawyer show, and telling stories at Ignite, Nerd Night, Tellabration, and Telling Tales Out of School. Patti also serves, although I really don't know how she finds the time for all of this, as a commissioner for the Recreation Advisory Commission, as a teacher of history for Rec and Ed, as a storyteller in the Ann Arbor Storytellers Guild, and volunteers for the Ann Arbor Film Festival, and as a DJ for WCBN. She lives with her husband, Ken Anderson, in Ann Arbor. So please help me in welcoming Patti Smith. Thank you for being here, Patti.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And to be fair, I did drop. Oh, there we go. Thanks, Michelle. There we go. I should be unmuted now, I hope. And to be fair, we did drop out of the Film Fest volunteer stuff. It just got to be way too much. So I want to thank Michelle and Lauren for getting me all set up here. Let me go ahead and share my screen. La, 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 la. There we go. All right, cool. And I'm going to go ahead and get this set up. I did Zoom school for a year, so bringing back some memories here. So thank you all for being here. I know it's a lovely night. It is a little warm out though, so hopefully you're in some air, even better if you're enjoying a delicious Michigan beer. So I'd like to have a little bingo game that, and there's no prizes, but these are just some things that we'll be talking about throughout the course of this presentation, and it's also in the book. So if you like the presentation and want to know more, I'm sure the library has the book, or you can order it from Amazon or from the publisher, or a lot of local bookstores have it too, which is awesome. So we're going to talk about a brewery had a mascot designed by Walt Disney Studios. A brewer employed a young Henry Ford. There was a city in Washtenaw County that was the wettest city in Michigan for a minute there. We'll talk about who the earliest brewers were, examples of what a lager is, what Native Americans brewed with, which founding fathers liked to drink beer, the oldest brewery in existence, and there was a Michigan brewery that took a case all the way to the United States Supreme Court. That and more in the next hour. So why this book? So is Michelle did a great job introducing me. A lot of that stuff I don't do like all the time. So it sounds like I'm busy. I'm really not. And a lot of that stopped because of the pandemic. So, but I've been writing about beer and history. I've been writing about beer since about, I always have to think, about 2010. A friend of mine was starting a business and he's like, hey, do you want to write about beer? Like, I'll give you beer. I'm like, all right, cool. And I started reviewing beer, going to different brew pubs, going to events, and I still do that every now and again. Been more writing about history since about 2013 when I started pitching the books to my publisher. I've had for 3 of the 4 books, it's been the same publisher. They're called Arcadia. They're pretty well known. They have the little niche books with the sepia toned color kind of covers on them. So I decided to combine beer and history, my 2 favorite things to write about. And I emailed my editor and I was like, hey, John, I'm thinking about this. And he's like, oh, that's great, but I need a proposal. And you might know this, when you do a nonfiction book, you have to do a proposal first and then get a publisher to buy it. And there's not like big money. You don't get like in advance, but they will agree to publish it. So I'm like, yeah, I'll get it together. And it took me a while. And I finally got the proposal. It's like pages and pages. Finally got it together. And I submitted it to him about March 8th, 2020. So think for a moment what was happening March of 2020. Yeah, it's my pandemic book. I had these visions of spending the summer of 2020, like going to historical societies and museums and libraries. And none of that happened because of the pandemic. So most of the research was done online along with some books that I had. But for the most part, it was online. I'm still delighted with how it turned out. I'm very happy about it. It's just that it was a little bit different than, the process was a little bit different than what I thought it would be. So tonight, we are going to talk about, I'm a teacher, I got to have an agenda. We're going to talk about the world history of beer. We'll talk a little bit about American history. It's really not super exciting what happened in America, not until like more recently. We'll look at Michigan history, and then we're going to zoom in on local history. We'll talk about Holland, Kalamazoo, and Grand Rapids. So let's start with world history. Someone much smarter than me excavated this carving. It's Sumerian villagers, and somehow they figured out they were sharing a beer about 4,000 before Common Era, so about 6,000 years ago. Generally, the kind of agreed upon time frame is that beer came to be about 6,000 years ago. And you know this as being history people, you get different dates and you get different things. Some sources say beer has been around for like 9,000 years. Some say 5,000. It just, mostly I've seen about 6,000 or 7,000 years. Suffice it to say, it's been around a really long time. So where did this amazing beverage come from? There's this lovely little story that says, you know, and this is true, I mean, any cereal grain can ferment spontaneously, right? Yeast, wild yeast in the air. There's like this story, I don't know if it's true, but they think there's no way to know if it's true. There's a story like someone left bread outside, it rained, some villager, you know, Mesopotamia was walking around and, hey, sure, why not? Drinks it and is like, yeah, that's great. We don't know. We know though that it's been thousands and thousands of years since we began drinking this delicious beverage. We know that Mesopotamians enjoyed beer. There is evidence they used roasted or toasted grains, kind of like we do now, maybe a different process of toasting and roasting, but date syrup was used, I would guess, for the sweetening. And no hops. And if you're a hop head, if you're an IPA fan, and a lot of people are, hops are those green kind of cone shaped, I'm not doing a good job of this, but cone shaped, very floral, and they are excellent for preserving beer, and they also add a flavor. We're going to talk about when hops came to be mentioned with beer, but back then they were not. We think, pretty sure it tasted and looked like porridge. If you think about like your morning oatmeal, imagine if that was beer, but it was still beer, so can't complain. We know that Babylonians had tablets with recipes for beer. They found about 20 recipes for beer, basically dealing with different grains, different cereal type grains. But that's kind of impressive, I think. Like they were actually chiseling the stuff out. The Sumerians, circa 3400 BCE, had tablets with hymns to Ninkasi, who was the patron goddess of beer. And that's who I hope I am reincarnated. When I die, I hope they meet me at whatever there is and say, hey, that was you. I'll be like, oh, cool, I knew it. About 1700 BCE, we have found payments, like receipts, if you will, payments showing that people were paid for their work in beer. I don't know if this is fair or not, maybe not. Workers got 2 liters, management and the priests got 5. We also know beer was used as medicine. I've thought about this a lot. We found like, you know, prescriptions for beer. I kind of think in addition to making you feel no pain, as they say, you know, water was gross. As history folks, you know that what most people know, water was used gross. But if you start drinking beer, which has been boiled and it's safer, you might start feeling better. So I like to point that out, that that was used for medicinal purposes. What did people brew with? You used what you had on hand. Maize in Africa, agave in Mexico. Russians used rye, barley, commonly used today. Wheat is also used in wheat beers. You also could get creative. You still can, but back then we have found recipes and they have found beer that had things like hay in it, dandelions, mint, which, you know, that might be okay. Little weird, wormwood, hemp, and my favorite, crab claws. So someone was eating and they had crab claws and they said, sure. And they threw that in the pot of beer. And I think that's gross, but yeah, maybe it was good. I don't know. So speeding ahead a few thousand years, we're in our Common Era. Beer comes to Europe and just about everyone loves it. The brewing happened by women. Women were the first brewers. If you think about it, it kind of makes sense. It was a foodstuff. Women did the cooking. If you had a farm, for example, you were making the bread, you were canning, you were, plucking chickens, whatever. I'm thinking a Little House on the Prairie, whatever else you did. You also were making beer. If you had farmhands, there is a style of beer called farmhand ale. Farmhand ale is a very low alcohol beer, about 4%. That was what they made on the farm. You're literally part of the pay for your farmhands is beer, but you don't want them like a 14% barley wine or an 8% stout, because they're going to be passed out and probably not doing too good. So that's where farmhouse style came from. And like I said, most of the early brewers were women. Once it got into the commercial realm, that's when it became the domain of men. It's still heavily, and this is not bad or good. This is just historical facts. The industry is still very much male dominated. They are taking a lot of steps to be more inclusive to everyone. They're doing, I think it's a great, I don't work in the industry, but I know a lot of people, and I can say I met one person who I thought was, no, I'm sorry, there are two people. There's two people I've met who are just kind of jerks. Everybody else, I'm talking dozens and dozens of people, are amazing. So just put that out there. Hops are green floral hops. Their first mention in the 9th century. I think it was a monk, somebody out there is like, you know what, let's do this. And we're still doing it over 1,000 years later. Most hops in American beer come from the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington. There is a style called New England IPA, which is hops from New England. You can also get beers with English hops and Australian hops. I prefer English hops. I actually don't like American hops, so more beer for you if you're an IPA fan. The oldest brewery in existence, I never say it right, but Weihenstephan in, no surprise, Germany. It opened in 1040. That's amazing. As an American, like seeing that, like, oh my God, that's wow. I hate to fly. It terrifies me, but I will get on a plane and I'm going to go there one day because they have been operating for almost 1,000 years. They do bottle. You can buy some of their lagers here in America. It's fine. I mean, it's fine. I'd like to go there, and so we can all throw in some money and I'll do like a GoFundMe or something. Germans take beer very seriously. I am part German. I don't think I'm surprising anyone by saying that they take it seriously, so seriously that about over 500 years ago, they passed a law still on the books called the Bavarian Purity Law. And the Bavarian Purity Law, so what was happening is people are making stuff back in the 1400s, and they're presenting it and selling it as beer. It had stuff like, well, wormwood and crab claws and hey, and Germans like, no. If you're gonna sell this as beer, you get 3 things. You get water, you get barley, and you get hops. Anything else, and it's not beer. The magical 4th thing they were missing is yeast. They just didn't know about it. So once we kind of discovered and figured out yeast, we're like, oh, cool. That's been added. So the Bavarian Purity Law now is 4 things. And there are breweries in United States, Europe, that abide by this: barley, hops, water, yeast. And I'll tell you, my homebrew group did a same beer, different yeasts experiment about 10 years ago. 20 different yeasts, same water, same barley, same hops, same recipe, 20 different yeasts, 20 different beers. It was pretty incredible. I never would have guessed. We're going to talk about lager now. Lager was discovered by accident in the 1600s. So what is the difference? We have lagers and ales. If you're a whiskey fan, whiskey is like the banner, and then there's bourbon and scotch and rye. Beer is the banner. You have lagers and ales. What's the difference? Very simplistically, lagers are aged at colder temperatures for longer periods of time, and with a top rising yeast is a lager yeast. If you've ever had a Pilsner, a Bock, a Doppelbock, a Maibach, an Oktoberfest, a Dunkel, those are all lagers. What do they taste like? If you drink Miller, Coors, those are all lagers, and those are 100% to style. Those are exactly what a lager should be. you know, a lot of home brewers, you don't really care how it comes out, but if you're entering contests or you're professional, you want to hit and check certain boxes. So lagers traditionally are much lighter, a little bit fizzier, carbonated. They have a nice head to them. If you ever are looking for really good lagers and you're in the Ann Arbor area, Wolverine State Brewing Company is almost exclusively lagers. They're excellent. It's rare to get, most breweries do mostly ales. It's kind of, I don't want to say rare, but it's not as common to get a lager at a microbrewery. What they tend to usually make are ales. Ales are your wheat beers, your IPAs, your porters, your stouts, your browns, your brownie wise, your heffies. It's very simplistic, but they are aged at warmer temperatures, shorter periods of time. We could make a beer tonight, and in 2 weeks it'll be fermented. We can carbonate, chill it, drink it. Germans primarily historically made lagers, thinking that, and they're not wrong. They would say, you know, lagers require, you know, this patience and timing and temperature control, and you know, and it is not really science, well, kind of sciencey, I guess. So they kind of looked with disdain on ales. And in the book, I talk a little bit about the lager ale kind of battles between English and Belgium immigrants who made ales, and then Germans who made lagers. So again, lager discovered by accident. Someone left their beer too long in a cave or somewhere, and we ended up with this delicious type of beer. Okay, there we go. So American history, you know, we know that when Columbus got here, he had made note of this. Other explorers made note. First peoples, Native Americans, were brewing. They were using corn, you used what you had, and actually black birch. They used birch sap from those trees. When I pitched this book to my editor, I had this brilliant, you know, oh, I'm going to find the stories of women and African Americans and Native Americans. And, you know, I feel like we don't do a great job of preserving that history. So I didn't really find much. The most information I found about Native Americans was coming from the UP, actually, where they used pine needles, and they used that. And I've actually had spruce beer with pine. It's not bad. It's pretty good. So one day, if I retire or something and have time and money, I would love to actually do the thing where I go around and find out some of those stories, because I think they're important and they should be told. We do know the first brew beer in the colonies was in Virginia, 1587. It was not good, and they pretty much immediately wrote to England and sent it by boat and said, send more beer, and they waited for the beer to come by boats. So the West India, I gotta make sure I get the name right, the West Dutch India Company started a brewery, a professional commercial brewery in New Amsterdam, which is now New York City. Some of the material I read said 1612 and some said 1632. So we'll split the difference. We'll say 1622. I don't know. They actually started a commercial brewery. It was pretty unusual just because most people were still really brewing and making alcohol at home. But by opening a brewery, now you've taken one thing off the plate of the settlers, of the people coming over to settle here. There's some history recorded that a brewery was kind of like often the first or one of the first buildings. And then that would attract people. You would need a cooper, you would need delivery people, you would need brewers. And that oftentimes was one of the first buildings in an area, not always, of course. And again, most people were still making it at home, but we know that sometime in the early 1600s, New Amsterdam had its own commercial brewery. That is not a picture of it. I just found that when I Googled West Indian Company. And there's some pilgrims enjoying some tasty beer. Here are some ads that are delightful. In the upper left-hand corner, you see a young child urging you to the great health drink, Stout. And it looks like there's like a thing of butter. I don't know what else is there. It's kids did drink beer back in the day. Blatz, not that long ago, how mother and baby picked up case of Blatz beer. There you go. And I just think this charming picture of young children dancing the maypole there around a bottle of beer, because you know what says the spring but children in a beer bottle maypole. So yeah. in all fairness, there was a couple things going on back then. Most beer that people were making and drinking was really low alcohol, about 3% alcohol by volume. If you get like a Coors or a Miller, it's like 4.5, 5. Your IPA might be 6.5, 7, stouts 8. So pretty low alcohol. They also had what they called small beers, which were 1% alcohol. I have no idea how they got it that low, but that was often enjoyed by like the ladies and the kids. So I know how it sounds like, oh my God, the kids, but and it was safer than water, right? I mean, and if you ever see a breakfast stout, Founders has the breakfast stout, Kentucky breakfast stout. They literally had that for breakfast. The good stuff still came from England. We were doing our best, but the good ale still came from England by boat. We did get a really good start here in America in St. Louis. You see the Budweiser ads I just found. I kind of like those. Mr. Anheuser. Anheuser started it. His son-in-law was Bush. I got to remember that I do it like alphabetically, A, B, father, son-in-law. Anyway, Anheuser and Bush started brewing. Anheuser was actually a candle maker, and then they just were like, all right, we're going to brew. So they started brewing, making this beer, making a lager. They were German. And it was actually Bush, the son-in-law, who really thought bigger. And he was like, no, I want this to go far. So he was the one who invested in the refrigerated train cars. Once you started getting railroads, now you have a car, you put the beer barrels and kegs. Along the way, they'd stop at ice houses and replenish. And as their beer started going back and forth around the country, they also started buying up breweries and saloons to make and sell their product. So they were, again, if you drink Budweiser, that's awesome. I'm not like a beer snob at all. I drink it. It's fine. But they are really the ones I think that should get the credit for really thinking big and really getting things out there going. And they're still around, of course. So our founding fathers, there they are. They all like to drink. That's the answer to that trivia question. They all liked it. They really liked their hard cider. They enjoyed beer. They enjoyed spirits. They had their own brewers. Someone asked me once about Sam Adams. He's the gentleman in the lower left here with the kind of reddish outfit on. I think it was my first presentation. Someone said, well, what about Sam Adams? And I'm like, I think he was a brewer by trade, but actually when I researched it, his dad brewed, and he was also a maltster. So he malted the grain, and Sam Adams for sure malted. We think he brewed, but at any rate, he was involved in some way. And like I said, they definitely all enjoyed the beer. They had their own brewers. So like I said, I mean, with American beer history, I mean, I think it's really more interesting looking at the smaller sections, like looking at state by state. And for Michigan beer history, I think we are best told through the people. So that end, and the upper left-hand corner with the suspenders, that is Larry Bell, circa 1985-ish. Bell's Brewery sent me that picture. I wanted to use it in the book, but it's so old, it pixelated. I tried with Photoshop to like save it in different things. My editor's like, Patti, we can't use it. So it's in the presentation. Larry Bell, as you know, probably have heard his name. Bell's Brewery, the biggest brewery in Michigan, was sold to another entity that I always forget the name of. Last year, there was some controversy amongst the community, but not gonna lie, if someone offered me millions of dollars for my beer book, you know, not gonna have to ask me twice. So, and they're still making good beer, so I'm happy. In the lower left, that's the Menominee Brewing Company from the Upper Peninsula. I love the picture. It's just representative of how the beer got around. I mean, you had a horse and buggy, you had your draftsmen, you had the guys, you know, that would haul the beer barrels, and you went to the saloons. Here's your barrel, tap the barrel, get the beer flowing. To that end, the picture on the right is the National Brewery in Grand Rapids. I've seen this picture with so many different people, but it's usually the same. It's the guys who brew, they're sitting there, they got mugs. These guys don't look, some of them look happy. They usually are kind of like happy and excited because they got their mug of beer. You got hopefully a well-paying job. And I just thought that again was representative of the pictures that I've seen of all the different breweries and all the different brewers. And then in the middle is Mr. Kern from Port Huron. Kern Brewery was one of the big Port Huron breweries back in the day. I just like that he's double fisting and the dog is eyeing the beer very helpfully. I have a dog. You've not heard him. He's being a good dog, but he looks at the beer and then you show it to him and he's just like, ew, gross. No, mom, what? Some more pictures here. Upper left, Frankenmuth. Cannot have a Michigan beer book without Frankenmuth. Frankenmuth is literally little Bavaria. They had a number of breweries back in the day. A number of them were called Frankenmuth Brewing Company. I had to untangle that, but I think I did okay. They are actually considered to be the current iteration of the Frankenmuth Brewing Company. Is considered to be the oldest continuously operating brewery in Michigan. There were a few years they got hit by the tornado back in the 90s. They did stop for a few years. I was actually supposed to be there, not at the brewery, but in Frankenmuth that day, but I canceled because of the weather. So, close call. In the middle there are two people drinking and enjoying Stroh's at Phelps Cocktail Lounge in Detroit. Got to give Stroh's a shout out. Lower left is Goebel from Detroit, and that just shows kind of the evolution of delivery. We've gone from horse and buggy, and then we now have motor vehicles, still have your delivery men, still have your barrels. Now, of course, today, all sorts of ways to distribute your beer. And I wanted to include Mr. Erickson from Big Rapids, lower right, just awesome stash. Look at the mustache. Yay, Mr. Erickson. And that is his brewery there. And again, that to me is very indicative of how a lot of the places, not all, but a lot of them, like the saloons and hangouts, looked back in the day. They had kind of the false front, and they seemed to always have like a balcony that people would be hanging out. It was hot, and so they'd be hanging out with the beer, and I love those pictures, and there's a lot of them like that in the book. Some ads, upper left, Grand Rapids Brewing Company. We'll talk about them later on in the presentation. I adore that they have the two like men in heaven looking down at the beer, very happy. Lower left, once again, questionable ad. A mother is giving the silver foam beer to her children, and the dad is like, whatever, let me read my paper. In the middle, Old Michigan beer here from Michigan Brewing Company in Grand Rapids. Pfeiffer's, big brewery in Detroit, and they actually made a cookbook with lunch recipes, including a recipe for beer soup, which is basically beer and cheese, but you know. Goebel beer, this is problematic. This was pre-World War II. Obviously became a problematic symbol when it was appropriated and used by very bad guys in Germany, and they changed the emblem, but that is one of their old labels, probably valuable if anyone has that. And then upper right there is the Cadillac Brewing Company from Detroit. I am a car person, so I had to include that one. This lovely building was called the Mansion House. It was in Detroit. One of the first commercial brewers, Thomas Owens, had his brewery kind of like, I think, around the corner, you could say. It's gone. It's gone, unfortunately. But I love the story that, so Thomas Owens, one of the first commercial brewers in Detroit, he is storing his beer in this building in the barrels. Like everything else back in old-timey days, it catches fire. Somehow the barrels like explode, something happens, and there's literally beer running down the streets of Detroit, running down Griswold and Atwater streets in Detroit. Some fun guy in the newspaper writes a little thing and says, you know, it's still there. Grab your mugs, grab your steins, get out to Griswold and Atwater, Old Mansion House, and get some free beer that's been sitting in the street with the mud in the mug. And you know somebody, you know people did, you know they did. So Detroit, obviously, a lot of brewing history, literally had someone brewing from the start. When Cadillac and his men came over, of course, there were people already living here. Nevertheless, they set up a Fort Pontchartrain. Cadillac's like, yeah, here's the fort, have your ribbon farms, do you, whatever, but you can't, there's a few things you can't do. You can't compete with me in a few areas, one of which was brewing. He was like, no, there's one brewer, and that's Joseph Parent, who Cadillac brought over. And Joseph Parent was the brewer. So literally since like the early 1700s, there has been some sort of beer in Detroit. Probably not maybe the best. I mean, I don't know what was there other than like maybe corn or something, but it's been there since 1848. There's been lager in Detroit. Frederick Elms is credited, German, obviously, with introducing lager to the area. Thomas Owens, I mentioned. And then there's two women that I always like to mention. As I said, when I started out, I was like, I really want to, dig in and get these untold stories. I am sure they are out there, but since I was limited to what's been digitized, I didn't find much about women, but these are two in Detroit I want to mention. Eliza Greiser's husband had a home operation, not uncommon, literally worked from home. So back of the house, think of like kind of, I always picture like a shotgun style house. Maybe I'm wrong, but so the brewing apparatuses, equipment is back there. The front, they had a little saloon. Oftentimes the women kind of ran the saloon. Eliza's husband dies, and she and her son keep it going for about 15, 16 years. Ended up doing about 1,200 barrels a year, which I think it was pretty impressive. Women were not involved with alcohol. Ladies did not drink in public. So if you were brewing, if women were still brewing at home, it wasn't very common. And if they were drinking, it was in the house. You didn't, run the streets. If you were a lady, didn't do that. Anna Cool is the other one I want to mention. Her husband, Anton, had a commercial operation. And I always read this directly. The direct quote, Anton died in 1874, quote, by reason of defective sidewalk that was under repair by the city, unquote. And all that means is our streets were just as bad, 150 years ago. So poor Anton is walking along and he falls and dies. And there's no Jeffrey Feiger, there's no Lee Free, there's no Call Sam. Anna had to keep it going, and she kept it going for another 13 years and then sold to somebody else and hopefully got to retire and have a nice life. So shout out to Eliza and Anna. By necessity, but pioneers nonetheless. Got to talk about Stroh. There's books, articles, much information about the family out there. I don't get into the details of what all, how it fell apart. I think the origins are much more interesting. Bernhard Stroh was a third generation brewer. He's there in the picture, second from the right. So he's the guy kind of leaning with the mustache. He came to America, started brewing out of his house at 57 Catherine Street in Detroit, making lagers. He was German, making lagers, literally selling his Pilsners door to door to door. Obviously, it went very well, and he was able by 1875, after about 10 years or so, 10, 12 years, buy property. And that's what you see on the right. There's their family home. They had a malting facility. They stored barley. They stored hops. They had an ice house, and they lived there. By 1875, things are going awesome. He changes the name to Stroh's Brewing Company. This is the trivia question. One of these days, someone's going to win big with this. The original name was Lion Brewing Company. If you drink a Stroh's beer, it has a lion. So when you win the Jeopardy with this, remember me and just, I don't know, send me $20 or something. Everything's going great. And then poor Bernhard dies at age 60 in 1882. He passes away. His son Bernhard Jr. takes over, and he really innovated. He did the fire. He did the copper kettles, the fire brewing process. They keep growing and growing. May 1st, 1918, Prohibition hits in Michigan. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. And they pivot. They have all this equipment in this land and capital. They pivot. They made ice cream. They made near beer, which never went over with anyone. They made a malting syrup, which there's a can. You can see images on the internet of these cans that say malting syrup, very clearly says not to be used for brewing alcohol. And I'm certain no one brewed alcohol because no one drank during Prohibition. Wink, wink. So they did sell quite a bit of malting syrup that I'm sure people use to make bread, as they, should. So, anyway, moving along, 1933, repeal, no more prohibition, yay. They just pivot back to beer and they grow. After World War II, after all that era, there's a lot of just consolidation, brew pubs gobbling up smaller brew pubs. They bought Goebel, which was huge, in 1964. 1979, they buy the Park Davis complex along the riverfront in Detroit. And things are going gangbusters until May 1st, 1985, when they cease operations, and that ended brewing in Detroit until the 90s. So pretty significant. Again, I mean, in simple terms, they kind of got too big too fast, made some bad financial decisions, bought some things maybe they shouldn't. And unfortunately, it all ended in the 80s. The good news for Stroh's fans, it is being brewed. You can buy it. It was contract brewed by Brew Detroit in Detroit. I was 13 in 1985, so I never had the real beer. I made my dad try it, and he's like, "What is this crap, Patty?" Whenever I give my dad a home brew, like a brew pub ale, he's like, "What is this, Patty?" It's the same every time. He tries it, bless his heart. He said it tasted different. I've heard doing these presentations, it tastes hoppier. That would track, I think, because we are very much fans of hops, I feel like, and that's not bad. They do give flavor. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Stroh's being made now is significantly hoppier or different. Just a few more things in Detroit. Voigt, Prost beer. The Voigts, they were a fairly big operation. Carl William C.W. Voigt was the dad. His son E.W. Edward William joined him in the brewing industry. He actually, when the son took over in 1872, he again, a lot of times the second generation expands. EW won awards at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. He made a bunch of money, and God bless him, he invested it back in Detroit. The Voigt, EW Voigt, was a founder of the Edison Illuminating Company, which employed a young engineer named Henry Ford. He was responsible for different branches of the Illuminating Company opening in different parts of the state. He helped found what is now the DIA, the Institute of Arts. He also had a 150-acre farm off of Woodward Avenue that he gave to the city for housing, and there's still Voigt Park. It's still a subdivision of houses. So in the book, I talk about how some of the brewers were just amazing philanthropists, politicians, and, just civically involved, civic-minded. The next picture is Johnny Pfeiffer from Pfeiffer's Brewing in Detroit, designed by Walt Disney Studios. Conrad Pfeiffer, the founder, came from a wealthy family in Germany. He was considered a wealthy scion of this well-established family. Nevertheless, got himself on a boat, came to America. He worked as a cooper, machinist, laborer, finally a brewer, and they did have quite a bit of success there. When he passed away, his wife and daughter actually took over until Prohibition. They had about 7 years in there, and Prohibition. Koppitz Melcher here. Conrad Koppitz was a Stroh's head brewer, branched out on his own. The reason I have these particular pictures is because they're circa World War II. There's the Jeep, there's the little things you put on bombers, you have the kind of the squirrel and all that. The reason I do that is because World War II was extremely important to beer. We're still kind of recovering from Prohibition. Tastes have changed. There's a lot of consolidation happening. Beer alcohol has not reached its per capita drinking yet. It doesn't till the 70s, but definitely not World War II. However, the government does something special. United States government says breweries are going to be considered essential businesses. Now, prior to 2020, that would not have meant really anything to me. I would have been like, oh, words. Okay, great. But I'm like, oh my God, they were essential businesses. And the government said, what we're going to do, breweries, is you can't can all the canning is only going to happen for the soldiers' rations. And we're going to requisition 15% of your output, put it in cans, ship it to our guys overseas as part of the ration packs. So they got the cigarettes, the tinned meat, and beer. what that allowed the brewers to do is say, look, we are essential. We are making this vitamin B rich, delicious beverage. We're paying taxes. We're employing people. We are patriotic. When we talk about Prohibition, we'll talk about how beer became unpatriotic in a sense. This really brought it back. Then when the men came home, they had developed brand loyalty, right? They're drinking this lighter lager. And that, then there was consolidation. That's a whole separate talk. But basically, it really, in my opinion anyway, World War II absolutely kind of helped rehabilitate that alcohol image that was, still recovering. Just a few more pictures. Philip Kling was a big brewer in Detroit, also another big company. Again, very much, he was actually a cooper when he started out. He employed his daughter as a bookkeeper, Go Kling, and his son took over some operations of the brewery and also ran an amusement park in Detroit, which I think is kind of cool. Like, I've seen some pictures and I'm like, oh, cool. And then there's Goebel, the old label, and then the new Bantam, the rooster mascot. Prohibition, this again is a topic. I had this wonderful chapter written and there was just not enough space. There are plenty of books that talk about Prohibition. We always had a temperance movement, at least in Michigan, most other places too. Temperance tended to be like, you as a person should watch what you drink. You should not be, drinking up your money. You should just kind of, moderate. There's a lot of like Christian temperance movements and so on. Then you got prohibitionists, and prohibitionists were policy change. They want it illegal. No one can have it. And it made for some strange bedfellows. And the reason I say that is because a lot of women were prohibitionists, and I cannot at all blame them. If you married a man who drank away the paycheck, who came home and abused the family and you might think, well, if I get the alcohol out, now we know today that alcohol is not the cause, that they're still going to do this stuff. But back then it was worth a try, right? I mean, that was your lot in life. You were stuck. Doctors were prohibitionists. Alcohol was not regulated. People died. I mean, there was alcohol that was just bad and people died. So doctors, churches, ministers, so on. And it really started picking up steam during World War I. Beer is kind of associated with Germans. Who were we fighting? The Germans. So there were like very, xenophobic, very racist kind of like ads and ideas coming forward saying like connecting drinking with them, the Germans, the immigrants, and us, the Americans. Well, we don't drink that stuff. Saying like any dollar you put in beer is a dollar in Germans' pockets, and just so many breweries were, owned by Germans and don't go. I mean, they changed, was it sauerkraut? They called it like Liberty cabbage or something. I mean, they were pretty hardcore, right? So beer kind of came to be seen as anti-patriotic because of the association with Germany. And so, it picked up steam. In Michigan, we went dry early. We actually passed a law in the early 1900s, the local option law, saying that municipalities, cities, and counties could go dry. And Jackson County went back and forth, wet dry. Every 2 years they'd vote. By me, Lenawee County, the Washtenaw County, Manchester, if you know Manchester, Michigan, small town, they were considered the wettest city in Michigan for a while because Lenawee, Jackson, and Monroe were dry. And Manchester, in its 2-block downtown, had like 7 saloons, 2 breweries, and a distillery. So finally, we all, as a state, those who could vote, which was basically white men, black men and technically could vote. I don't know what that was like I don't know, but those who could vote did, and they voted to go dry. So May 1st, 1918, everything shut down. That is an actual picture from Detroit of alcohol being dumped out. On the left, I just love my anti-prohibition people. They brought a cow. And the cow has a thing that says, "I can't give milk. The dry move stole my food." Reference, no doubt, to the spent grain that farmers still get from breweries to feed their cow. Obviously, people drank. We know that they used that barley or that malt syrup to make beer. You could get grapes, dried grapes. You could make wine. There were speakeasies all over the place. you had the Purple Gang, you had all this stuff happened. We finally saw the light. 1933 repeal went through. Michigan was the first state to approve repeal. So we went dry early, but we voted to go wet. In 1933, the fun all started again. So let's talk about some local stuff here. So we're going to start by talking about Holland. And there's just some pictures. I had a really hard time finding really good pictures. So I have what I could find. If anyone has pictures, I would love it. Please email or let me know. First brewery was 1863. Mr. Ailing started it up to about 1,000 barrels by the end of that decade. I'm going to say Mr. a lot because for whatever reason, first names are not always recorded in history, and it just kind of is what it is, I guess. In 1871, there was the Great Holland Fire, which destroyed Mr. Ailing's, destroyed most of the town, actually, as well as his operation. So that went away. But in 1873, 2 years after the fire, Mr. Zeeb from Milwaukee came to town and opened a brewery known as Holland City Brewery on 10th Street and Maple Avenue. He sold it to Mr. Sutton, and Mr. Steiner stayed on as brewer. Then Sutton kind of bought out his partner. So now Sutton's running the brewery. And his goal is to be as big as the Cincinnati Brewers. Cincinnati was the beer city at that time. A lot of my research, people would say, well, we're going to be like Cincinnati, or we're going to have that Cincinnati beer. That's what Mr. Sutton wanted to do. He wanted to make a celebrated lager beer, quote, so light and palatable that hardly any intoxicating parts are left in it. Unfortunately, did not come to pass. He ran into financial trouble, poor Mr. Sutton, and two of his brewers, Mr. Zeeb and Anton Seif, and I hope I'm saying this right, S-E-I-F. When I read it in my head, it comes out as Seif. So hopefully that is what it is. Anyway, we'll call him Anton. Anton bought the brewery, and there's the map showing where his Holland City Brewery was at. He did go on to some success. The problem was at this time, and we're talking like 1870s, 1880s, the city of Holland is having some battles between the go dry versus the stay wet. So the wets and dries, we called it. City council raised saloon fees at the end of the decade, 1877. They raised the fees, and there were 16 saloons in Holland at that time, dropped to 7 within a decade. Could have been other things, but the raising the licensing fee did not help anything. They made them close on July 4th, which was a huge, huge day for them. And so they lost all that business. And then by 1890, the licensing fees went up to $250. I looked it up. That would be about $8,000 today. And that's pretty significant, especially if you're trying to start a business, start a saloon in that case. Then they let citizens vote. So in 1908, 1910, 1913, and 1916, the city of Holland said no saloons. So what that did is almost not good for breweries, but it really increased the demand for bottled beer. Also, private clubs were starting to open. So, but the writing was kind of on the wall, and Anton actually, he jumped early. In 1917, Anton was still brewing, but he pivoted and he started making cheese, and he actually bought Banner Creamery and started making cheese a year before we went dry. So he had the cheese operation up and going, stopped brewing beer, started making cheese, did not unfortunately survive, and it ended up closing in the 1920s. So unfortunately, he tried, he made the cheese, didn't quite make it. And I forgot to mention that there were thousands of breweries prior to Prohibition, and when it was over, there was less than 200. So it was very, very tough going. It was just completely, just a quick little shout out here to Zeeland. Zeeland did not have a brewer, but they had they at one point had some saloons. The saloons got in trouble. They sold to minors, didn't always pay their taxes, some issues. But in 1899, the town of Zeeland was like, kind of followed in Holland's footsteps, and they said, you're going to have to pay a licensing fee and pay $1,000 bond if you're a saloon. And that $1,000 is about $32,000 today. So you're talking what would be tens of thousands of dollars to operate a saloon. And you can see the little clip there that I have from the newspaper saying the Zealand Saloon closed, the license expired. So you got to come to Holland, go to Grand Rapids or Saugatuck. And that city, Zealand, officially became dry in 1906. Kalamazoo, there's a lot more in the book, but the first brewery they do know was 1837. Where it was and who was involved, not quite as clear. They think that it might have been some of the distillers in town who were involved. There was a guy named Jacob Harlan that was brewing at home. He might have been involved. It may have been on the north side. It may have been on Kalamazoo Avenue. It may have been on Olmsted Road. Whatever, 1837 was the year. We do know by 1842, a man was selling what they called strong beer at the Cash store on Main Street. And then by 1850, there was about 5 or 6 professional brewers in Kalamazoo. The people you see on your screen, the Birchnells, Dorothy and Joe, came from England. I just think Dorothy looks like she's not having it. I love this picture of her. The woman is not having it. She is here to make beer and to sell the beer. She is not here to play with you. I just love her look, like, really, come on. So 1858, they landed in Kalamazoo, buy a farm, they start brewing professionally. By 1865, it's called Old Joe's Brewery, and it sounds like a fun place. Second largest producer in Kalamazoo, made about 60 barrels a month. Their most popular beer was nicknamed Old Joe's Double X, probably ale, because they were from England, and English people, Belgian people tended to do ale as opposed to lager. Dorothy became the manager. Like I told, Dorothy's not here. She is here to manage and make beer. By 1867, she was manager. She was kind of running things while he brewed. He dies. A year later, she remarries, and she and that husband stay on the farm, and they keep making beer and malt liquors later on. But the hit of the place was Dorothy's ginger ale. That was a specialty that everyone loved. And then she ended up passing away. They stopped brewing. They kind of sold. I don't know if they sold the operations or what they did, but they ended up staying there. She passed away in 1892. So hopefully had a nice kind of ending to life there, I hope. Just some other Kalamazoo brewing concerns here. Richard Frank started a brewery on the south side on what is now Michigan Avenue. He brewed until about 1865. His operation was taken over by the man who married his widow. So Richard Frank was married to Caroline. Richard Frank dies. Caroline marries Henry Schroeder. Henry Schroeder takes over. You saw this with the Birchnells, and now it's not uncommon. You see like sons-in-laws remarry, and they just take over the brewing operation. Schroeder, he just sounds like kind of a fun guy. He was described in articles as being a lively fellow, loved parades. He had a little buggy that he decorated, like festooned, and he had his beer on it and like would march on the parade. Also sold beer on Sundays, did not please the local judges. So Mr. Schroeder knew the judges quite well, frequently got called in front of them for selling beer on Sunday, didn't like to pay taxes. You know, who does? I get it. I got to pay my summer taxes, you know, but whatever. Didn't pay taxes. So the revenue people hunted him down and literally like came into the facility and breached the barrels and sent the contents into the ditch. So poor Mr. Schroeder. Then the son ended up buying the property. It ended up getting torn down when the railroad came through. What you see on your screen shows you Slater's Brewery. That's I just like that little idyllic picture of this McCain's Corners, now a ghost town, rural southeast Kalamazoo County. McCain's Corners was an area where a Mr. Slater, Civil War veteran, brewed and sold the beer. He stopped brewing in 1880. He unfortunately lost a leg. I'm not sure how, but that stopped the brewing. He died about 5 years later. And then unfortunately, the town became a ghost town. The railroad was there, and then the railroad line was sold off and dismantled. And I just put this in the book just because it's so the railroad was crucial. I mean, when that went away, that's where we end up with ghost towns like that. But for a while, it was a place. It's worth remembering. I mean, it did exist. And they made some beer. So Kalamazoo Brewing Company, again, there's much, much more about Kazoo in the book, but this guy I thought was interesting. His name, the guy on the right, is Lorenz Brentano. He operated the second brewery called Kalamazoo Brewing Company, built it in 1857 on Walnut Street, and he made Bavarian lager beer. He was from Germany, so he made lager. The reason I bring him up, he had a really interesting resume. So before he came to America, he was a lawyer. He studied law. He practiced before Baden's Supreme Court. He was well known in the area for being logical, very great rhetoric skills. Also got involved in politics. He was a big time guy in the Democratic Left Party, and they attacked the moderate party that was in power. 1848, there was a revolution against the government, and he was actually the president. He was the leader and then elected president of this provisional republic. Unfortunately, the revolution failed, and now that it failed, he's now a war criminal, and he had to get out of Germany or else he'd be put in jail. So he went to Switzerland, then he got on a boat, came to Pennsylvania, set up a life for himself in Pennsylvania. He was a journalist. He published an anti-slavery magazine, a journal magazine. Then was like, no, I'm going to go west. Ends up in Kalamazoo and tells papers, I'm going to brew beer and live a quiet life. And he does for about a year or so. And then he sells it to someone named Nicholas Bowman, who is a brewer in town. Then he goes further west to Chicago, gets back into law, ends up writing, being a lawyer, and not only is he a successful lawyer, he runs for office. He's a congressman, one of the top politicians in the Chicago area. So just some really interesting story there. Eventually, the brewery, Kalamazoo Brewery, got sold to Barney Locker. His thing was Harvest Ale. I'm not sure what was in it, but it was very famous Harvest Ale. He brewed alongside Albert Vogt and Michael Henke, two of the brewers in Kalamazoo, and eventually became the largest brewery in 1865. He was, Mr. Locker, like so many others, very active in the community. He and his wife, Teresa, raised 8 children. He was the treasurer of the Germans Working Men's Society. He was a fireman. He was treasurer of the firehouse. He was a member of this German society. And all the while, he actually ended up growing it to be, he was the second largest in 1865. By 1874, he was the largest brewery in Kalamazoo, brewing about 15,000 barrels a year. This is all incredible. He was like under the age of 40 when he did all this. And I know that because he passed away from tuberculosis when he was just 41. His wife ran the brewery for a while and then sold off the land. But again, we have these incredible people doing like so much. And I'm like, oh my God, what have I done with my life? Like, Grand Rapids, literally Beer City, USA. There's a ton of information about Grand Rapids in the book. I picked a few stories I thought I just mentioned here. John Pennell was a man, got there in 1836, settled up at the bottom of Prospect Hill, which is near Ottawa and Lion Street, set up a brewery. He made a hop beer. He was English, so it was an ale. It was advertised as a hop beer, only a few thousand people around, and he still brewed, bless his heart. He was joined by Christoph Kusterer from Germany. Christoph came to Ann Arbor first, brewed for a minute, came out to Grand Rapids, brewed with Pennell, and that is Christoph there on the left, and that is his brewery there. Eventually gets his own brewery, and when he brewed with Pennell, when Pennell and Christoph brewed together, they made ale. But since Mr. Kuster was from Germany, there was also some lagers. Pennell, 1849, Pennell hears word something's going on in San Francisco about a gold rush. He takes off, leaves his partner to strike it rich. Spoiler alert, he does not strike it rich, and he returns to Western Michigan and lived a nice quiet life before passing away in 1899 or 1891. Anyway, Christoph Köster renames this place City Brewery, and he moved to East Bridge and Ionia Streets. And this is key because at that location where he moved his brewery was a natural spring. It was a gathering place for Native Americans. And it actually made, this is incredible, 40 gallons of water per minute were produced by this stream. And someone did the math. That would be 21 million gallons of beer you could make a year if you wanted to. That stream was critical. He used it to make the first lager in the area. He was involved in all aspects of business. He brewed, he managed, he delivered. And again, like so many others, he was civically minded. He helped found a church. He served as the grand marshal for parades. He was in German benevolent societies. Things were going well until 1880. Very sad, tragic ending. He was on the steamer called Alpena. It was traveling to Chicago across Lake Michigan. October 15th, 1880, clear day, everything's great. About 1 in the morning, a gale comes in and the barometric pressure drops, and there's just reports that the Alpena steamer could not stay afloat. It tipped over, it took on water, it sank. There was about 80 people, about 25 crew members and cargo, and they all died, unfortunately. There actually was, about a day or so later, like stuff started washing up on the shores of Lake Michigan. There were bodies. As far as I know, Christoph's was not one of them, but we know that everybody aboard perished. So very, very sad. The wreck is still lost. It's believed to be somewhere in the lake between Holland and Racine, Wisconsin. So very sad story there. A happier story is the Grand Rapids Brewing Company, which they built that castle-like building. And on August 7th, 1895, locals gathered to smash a beer bottle at 5 o'clock to honor this new adventure. This Grand Rapids Brewing Company was 6 Kalamazoo breweries, including, he was deceased, but the Cooster City Brewery was still going on with his sons. They were part of it. The Tush brothers they were big brewers. George Brandt had a brewery. There was the Fry brothers, Adolph Getz. There was Veit and Rathman's Eagle. All these 6 big breweries you can read about in the book all got together, formed a conglomeration to make the Grand Rapids Brewing Company. And the reason they did this, they all put their stuff together. There were outside competitions. There were the big guys coming into town and selling their stuff and squeezing the small guys out of business. There was American brewery conglomerates were all over the place. British syndicates were around. They were popping in and driving up prices. So something had to happen. So 3 years before the bottle smash, in 1892, they started consolidating. They started the process. They formed their own entity with presidents and vice presidents. They got cement from Germany. They got this reinforced steel, and they made a place they said was made for brewers. 60 unionized men, Brewers Workingmen's Union, and beer bottles and bottle wagon drivers made about 50,000 barrels a year at that location. They had the big silver foam. That was the mom feeding her kid the beer. That was silver foam. Very well known in Grand Rapids area, in Michigan, and in surrounding states. And a lot of the credit goes to that spring water that makes the 40 gallons a minute. So that water, eventually they enclosed the spring in a room that kind of filtered the air and light away from the water to keep it pure. They also they made the silver foam, they made a Bock beer, they made a Pilsner, they made a malt tonic. I'm not really sure what that would have been like, but they made that. They had a bottling plant. They had these famous horses that won like all sorts of awards. They won beer awards. They ended up building apartments around there for people to live in. There were storage areas, all this awesome stuff. And they were absolute purists. They used hops that only came from Washington, Oregon, Germany, very good quality of hops. They actually made their own yeast from strains from Munich and Vienna. Everything was controlled by their quality control lab. That was really not a thing back then. They had an actual quality control lab using science to make the best beer. By 1916, They were producing 610,000 barrels of beer a year. Nobody in Grand Rapids area brewed as much until Founders in the mid 2000s. Then the conglomerate starts buying saloons. They own about 20 saloons. Not uncommon for brewers to buy saloons. Sometimes they felt like the saloons were not giving them enough money, so then they'd buy the saloon, buy it from themselves, and kind of everybody's, got their hands all over. They opened ice houses in Hillsdale, Muskegon, and Cadillac. I forgot to mention earlier, ice houses was a huge thing. There was an article in the Holland paper about how one of the highlights of winter was getting ice from the lakes. There'd be like, toboggans, sleds, horses, pulling the ice, sending it down chutes. If you had that ice in an ice house, you could serve cold, you could lager, and you could serve cold beer in the spring and summer. And not everyone could do that. You needed an ice house, and they had some. Of course, 1918 hits. They had to stop May 1st. They still had the facilities, so they started making and some sort of ethyl alcohol and some sort of near beer, which they tried that for a little bit, and eventually they're like, you know what, we're done for good. They weren't, spoiler alert. They did try to sell the near beer, and everything I read about near beer, no one liked it. Like, I don't know what it tasted like, but like no one liked it. So they tried, but it didn't go over. And then the conglomerate had to sell off their parts. They had to sell the copper, they had to sell the pipes, the vats. Repeal comes, they want to get it together again. It's very difficult because they've sold their stuff. They've sold all their fixtures and their equipment. So they tried. They filed articles of incorporation, 1933, couldn't get it off the ground. So they merged with Furniture Brewing Company, and they brewed for a while in Muskegon, but they just never really were quite as popular as they were. And Goebel ended up buying them out a few years later. And then somebody from Chicago bought the assets and used them to brew. So again, so much more on the western side of the state. It's an entire section in the book, so much more. Other things you will find in the book. Where did malt liquor? We think of malt liquor as Billy D. Williams, works every time. No, when it started, it was literally the champagne of beers. It was fizzy and it was light. Possibly may have gotten its start at Grand Valley Brewing in Ionia. Lansing Brewing Company has a connection to one of the most horrific things in Michigan, the Bath Schoolhouse murders. There's a connection there between the wife of Lansing Brewing Company founder and the mass murder from the Bath School Massacre. There's our Supreme Court, circa 1909. Eberly Brewing in Jackson took a case all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, and that tale is in the book. And then there's a random German folk songs album cover that's in there because at my first presentation, someone asked me, well, Patti, if you could go back in time, where would you go to drink? And without hesitation, I said I would go to the Weinman Brewery in Lansing. Anna and Frederick Weinman, they had property, they had a brewery, they had a hop garden, they had pigs, they made sauerkraut, they malted, and they had a beer garden that was said to contain lusty Germans singing folk songs all night long. And I said, 1850, that's where I'm going. Everything went great until a women's seminary school moved in next door. And that was the end of the Weinman Brewery. But while it lasted, man, all night Germans singing, drinking songs. What is the state currently of beer, brewing? Well, including the big guys, there's about 9,000 breweries in the United States. That includes big guys, so not all brew pubs. We've got about 400 at any given time here in Michigan. Closings have gone up a bit this year. There have been more closures the first 3 months of 2022 than there were last year. The pandemic absolutely affected brewing, not as much as Prohibition, of course, but I do include a little bit about the pandemic in the book. And I don't name any names, but suffice it to say there were some really good places that did not make it. Now we have supply chain issues, we have labor shortages, we have increasing rents as Shorts Brewing up in Bel Air has bought an apartment building to give low cost housing to its workers for the summer. ingredients, grain. I heard that Russia and Ukraine have entered some sort of deal, or they're going to, but right now that is a huge concern. We don't know what's going to happen. And obviously no grain, no beer. So there are definitely things happening, and not all, good, but the good news is new breweries are opening up all the time. I'm going on a little beer tour up north later on this summer, and there's always new things to explore and drink. So that is the very good news. So if Lauren and Michelle, if there's any questions, or if people, I'll stop sharing my screen. Oh, I gotta move the faces, hang on. Okay, there we go. So if there's any questions, yeah.
Hi, thank you again, Patti. That was amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Fun and informative, and wow, I learned so much. So
thank you.
We have we always like to end right at 8:30, if not before. So we have minutes left. So if you have a question, please put it into the chat for Patti, and we'll give you a few minutes to do that. Okay, we got a question. Yes, what sparked your interest in beer history?
That is a great question. So I was writing about beer, mostly reviewing breweries, brew pubs, and writing about beer, like beers. After a while, you run out of things to say, like the lager was crisp and clear, and the ale, so that kind of tapered off a little bit. And I also love history because I've written the history books, and I just was like, I really love beer and I really love history. And there's a Grand Rapids beer history book, there's an Upper Peninsula beer history book, there's Detroit beer history, but there wasn't a Michigan beer history book. And I was like, oh, okay, let's pitch this to my editor. And so it was a really, I feel really lucky because I love Michigan, I love beer, I love history. So I just feel really lucky I get to do it. But it kind of all came together from different, aspects of life, and it just sort of came together.
Great. Any other questions from our audience? What's your favorite?
My favorite, okay.
My favorites.
Okay, so I get asked this question a lot, and I'll tell you my favorite style is stouts, even during the summer. Saugatuck Brewing Company, if you get out to Saugatuck, I highly recommend Saugatuck Brewing. My personal favorite is Neapolitan Stout. It has the vanilla strawberry chocolate. Some years it's more strawberry-y, some more chocolatey, it's so well done. It tastes like Neapolitan ice cream, but it's in a beer form. That's one of my favorites. I really like, I've gotten into like coffee beer. Wolverine State has the Barista, which is a coffee lager. It's really good. And I also I just had one of my friends had a bottle of, it sounds gross, but it's Uber Goober. It's from Shorts, and it has peanuts in it, and it's so good. It's delicious. So I have to, yes, I gotta I know some people look at me like, but no, honestly, it's really good. Try it. So, oh, I see. So there's a question. What breweries offer the most interesting tours these days? That's a really good question. I have not gone on a brewery tour, oh my gosh, in a really long time. I would say if you see a brewery that you're interested in, contact them. Things during the pandemic, they were so focused on just staying in business. I'm not sure how many tours they did, and I'm not sure if they're starting up, but I would say, I mean, honestly, I hate to say this, a really good one is Sam Adams out in Massachusetts. If you get out there, my husband and I went, and I knew the answers to all the questions. So I was like, I had to my husband's like, all right, Patti, let someone else answer. But that was really good. And I would say Bell's, I can't say that certainly. I'm sure they do. Founders, I think would be another great place. Probably the bigger ones, but the smaller ones might too. So
I've been on a brewery tour at Bell's. So they do.
Okay, awesome. Good.
Yes, and they're very good. So I would recommend Bell's if you have not. Somebody wanted to know, do you collect beer containers?
I don't, but a friend of mine, a couple people at the presentations have said they do. And a friend of mine got his house painted by someone who collects beer bottles. And he said he could bring some to presentations that are in person, but they're so fragile. And he's like, I'm kind of afraid to let them, I'd want to be with the beer. So I don't. I love that people do. I love seeing pictures of it. I live in a very small condo in Ann Arbor, and so I don't really have room, but I love when people will occasionally bring a bottle to a presentation or share a picture with me. I love that stuff. So
One question, I keep hearing of Grand Rapids as Beer City, USA. Why?
I honestly think it's due to the sheer number of breweries that they have there. There are, I don't even know how many, to be honest. And they also, if you look at a map, they also can look at the ones around the Grand Rapids area, and I think those are counted as well. They also host the Winter Beer Fest when that's happening, when it's not a pandemic. So my understanding from that is a number of breweries. Having said that, there's also a number of breweries in Traverse City, in Detroit. So I think it was one of those, it might have just been marketing, honestly. So, but definitely a lot of good brew pubs out there.
And then most commercial hops are grown in the Pacific Northwest in this country. Did you research varieties of hops that were grown in Michigan in the 1920s? There appear to be some intrepid growers of hops, including in Hamilton.
No, but that is a great jumping off point to research. I've driven by hop farms, and that always is, I find that delightful. So no, that is awesome. I would love to learn more about that. Where I know it's a lot of people now are kind of starting. As you said, most are Pacific Northwest. Those are the floral ones. So just to say, the ones from the Northwest tend to be like, they usually say citrusy, grapefruity, floral, and ones from England tend to be bitter. And I can't describe that anymore. It's not bitter like a lemon. It's just a bitter. I don't know, like Michigan hops, that would be interesting to see what sort of flavor and aroma they have. That's a good jumping off point.
What is the strangest beer you have tried?
Oh, I'm so glad someone asked that. Right Brain in Traverse City. I love them. They are so experimental. They made an asparagus beer. It's the only beer I've ever spit out of my mouth. I was at a beer festival and I said, I got to try it. I have to try it. And I got it and I put it in my mouth. And I honestly, I'm like, I can't. And I had to, like, I didn't want them to see me. So I went and I like hid behind the porta potty and spit it out. I have friends who love it. I applaud the asparagus. I applaud that. That's awesome. That was the strangest one I didn't like. The strangest one I love is Mangalista Pig Porter, also Right Brain. Apparently there's a Mangalista Pig Festival, and the challenge is to use all the parts of the pig. So in the mash, the giant mash tun with the grains in the water, they put like the pig head. And I was like, I don't know about that. And it is delicious. So those are the two strangest. One I couldn't drink, and another one I will seek it out if I see it. So give it a try. You never know.
Okay. Any further questions? Otherwise, I think we will wrap things up for this evening.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I know it's a lovely evening, so I really thank you for talking about beer for an hour and a half. Cheers. Go have a Michigan beer. Head on out there.
Yes. Thank you again, Patti. And thank you for joining us this evening. And as I said, the recording of this program will be available on the Holland Museum's website within a couple of days. So thank you so much for being
Thank you, Michelle and Lauren, everybody. Thank you.
Sharing all your knowledge with us, and good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Bye.